Of the many tanks which saw service during World War II, few are as recognizable as the iconic Soviet T-34. From its humble beginnings armed with a 76mm gun surprising the invading Germans to the upgraded T-34-85, these have seen service in nations around the world. However, even during the war, the firepower of the 76 and later the 85 would begin to fall behind in the constant arms race between the Wehrmacht and the Red Army. Today, we will look at the attempts to resolve this disparity through the use of a powerful 100mm armament within this battle-proven tank, as well as several other similar attempts following the end of World War II. Just like the Soviets, Czechs, and Egyptians sought to increase the firepower of their T-34s, you can upgrade the weapons on your mech with today's sponsor, War Robots Frontiers. War Robots Frontiers is a brand new free-to-play game in the War Robots franchise built from the ground up for PC and consoles. Take control of a mech customized to your playstyle in 6v6 PvP battles across 3 different game modes on 4 detailed maps built around working as a team. Try out the game today with the brand new Smuggler's Run Battle Pass featuring the all-new Scorpion War Robot, a new Tusk shotgun, Gamma Beam Cycle and Homing Missile Cycle gear, new cosmetics, and more. Download the game now for your PC or console of choice using my link in the description and get a special bonus including 7,500 salvage, the Water Dragon decal, and 1,500 credits to get you started. Huge thanks to War Robots Frontiers for sponsoring this video. Now let's get back to our main topic. Like just about anything related to military equipment, the desire for a more powerful gun came as a response to new armor being fielded by the enemy. The introduction of vehicles like the Tiger instantly made it clear that the 76mm armed T-34's days were numbered, being unable to do more than scratch the paint on these tanks frontally. This was by no means a shock to the Soviets, who by that point had already been experimenting with improved tank-killing firepower, such as the 57mm armed T-34s. However, it did make it clear that this work needed to be prioritized, with their sights set on an 85mm armament, which would lead to the introduction of the T-34-85. Similarly, the quest for a 100mm armament had also begun earlier than you might think. But for that, I'm going to briefly hand you over to Peter Samsonov, author of several books and host of the Tank Archives channel, to briefly explain how this began.
The request to develop a 100mm gun dates to 2 whole months before the Battle of Kursk. After penetration trials of a Tiger tank were completed, the Red Army identified the need for a sort of intermediate power weapon. They already had the 85mm gun, which could penetrate the front of a Tiger at a range of somewhere between 1 and 1.5 kilometers. For a longer range, they would have to use the 122mm A19. The A19 can penetrate a Tiger at pretty much any effective battle range, but it was big, it was cumbersome, and it would be difficult to fit into an armored vehicle. And so an intermediate weapon had to be found. It was a good candidate in terms of ballistics, the 100mm B-34 gun used by the Soviet Navy. This gun fired a 15.6 kilogram shell at 900 meters per second, which was more powerful than the 85mm gun and comparable in power to the 122. And so work began on not one, but 2 guns, the S-34 and the D-10. Both of these guns had identical ballistics, and both were intended for installation in the turret of an IS tank. In theory, these 100mm guns offered significant advantages over the D-25 that was installed in the IS-2. The guns were smaller, they were more compact, they were lighter, they were easier to handle, they had fixed ammunition instead of 2-part ammunition, which made them easier to load, and they had no muzzle brake, meaning that firing the gun would not create a cloud of dust and smoke that would reveal the tank's position. However, there were also critical disadvantages. The 100mm gun had a lower penetration at long range, in part because the shell it fired was smaller and lighter. Because the shell was smaller and lighter, it also couldn't carry as much of an explosive charge, and since the IS-2 was a breakthrough tank, this was quite an important feature. Furthermore, the designers of the D-25 also weren't standing still, and various improvements to the loading system somewhat mitigated the disadvantage the Z25 had compared to the Z10. Just because the 100mm guns weren't as good as the Z25 for a breakthrough tank, that didn't mean they were bad guns overall. While the S-34 did need a lot more work, the Z10 was actually a pretty good weapon, and so it was recommended for service and put into production. Since this gun was already installed to replace the Z5T, the turret of an IS tank, it seemed like a no-brainer to replace the Z5S and the casemate of an Su-85. And so that, plus a few other changes, turned the Su-85 into the Su-100, a very powerful tank destroyer that saw service beginning in early 1945 and is still used today in some remote parts of the world.
While this development would not immediately lead to a turreted T-34 armed with a 100mm, right around the same time the new Su-100s were entering service, yet another project would seek to utilize the 100mm, that being the T-44. This development and the idea to fit a 100mm into the T-34-85 would finally coincide in early 1945. Work on this would be detailed in a report dated the 17th of May, 1945, with a translated version available thanks to Tank Archives. Two different guns were chosen for trials, with the first being the 100mm LB1, also referred to as the ZIS-100, and the D-10T, based on the gun used in the Su-100. Initially, the LB1 was fitted into a standard T-34-85 from factory number 92, but understandably, this was not exactly the best option. In an attempt to improve the vehicle's performance with the new larger gun, factory number 183 created a modified T-34 hull and turret to accommodate it. These changes consisted of widening the turret ring and the turret itself, along with the elimination of the hull machine gun and machine gunner to allow for additional room to store ammunition. Both vehicles would carry a total of 30 rounds, although where the ammo was stored changed, with the standard T-34 holding them in the turret and the modified version stowing them in the hull. As shown by photos of the modified prototype design, the LB1 was also fitted with a muzzle brake to reduce the recoil of the gun during firing. One additional detail to note is that although you often see this vehicle referred to as the T-34-100, this designation was never actually used by the Soviets. Trials of both 100mm guns would be done using this vehicle, with the LB1 being deemed acceptable and the D-10T also being accepted, although with some changes needed. These included a safety mechanism added to the breech, the addition of a travel lock, changes to the position of the aiming wheel and guardrail to protect the gunner's hands, and strengthening of the extractor. The conclusion of the report favored the LB1, however, stating that if a T-34 with the 100mm were to be produced, that gun would be the one used unless production could not meet the demands. None of this would matter, as the development of the T-44 would also result in testing of a 100mm variant. Given the age of the T-34 platform by this point, it should come as no surprise that this new vehicle was given preference, with a 100mm armed T-34 being little more than a potential stopgap. In the end, though, neither of these designs would be chosen, with the T-54 superseding both tanks and entering production. Ironically, the gun inevitably chosen for this was not the previously favored LB1, with the D-10T being used in the new design instead. Roughly a decade after the Soviet endeavor to create a T-34-100, the Czechs would try their hand at a similar upgrade for their T-34s in 1953. Unlike the previous attempt, this modification would be a much simpler improvement, only changing the turret face to fit a 100mm gun. Unlike the former design though, this would be short-lived, with the project being abandoned the following year with no prototypes being built. Surprisingly, this would not be the end of the T-34-100 saga, with yet another design appearing just under 10 years later, this time by the Egyptians. Like the other vehicles we have discussed in this video, the Egyptian take on a 100mm T-34 is equally lacking in information. However, thanks to surviving examples and some limited sources, we can get at least a basic overview of the design. Whereas the previous attempts sought to fit the gun into a turret with fairly little in the way of modifications, this version would take a much more radical approach. Cutting torches in hand, the original T-34-85 turret was chopped open to allow the 100mm BS-3 to be fitted inside. Interestingly, although it may not be noticeable at a glance, looking closer, the gun was actually mounted backwards, with the rear of the turret becoming the front. We can assume this was likely done due to it allowing for more interior space. Thanks to some help from Israeli tank nerd, I was able to get some photos of one of the surviving examples showing some of the interior as well as documenting the actual armor thicknesses. It appears that these range from thin plates around 5mm to slightly thicker ones around 10mm on the front gun shield. We can also see that the roof is made up of several hinged plates, allowing it to be opened to improve ventilation or closed for better protection. Other than the heavily altered turret, the rest of the vehicle seems to have remained unchanged outside of a travel lock added to the engine deck for the new gun. A similar modification was also made to fit the Soviet 122mm D-30 howitzer. Known as the T-100 and T-122 respectively, these would see limited service against Israeli forces during the 1973 Yom Kippur War. Any further information on how they fared in combat, or even how many of these were built in total, has yet to be shared, unfortunately. Despite the improved firepower over the original 85mm, the new armor being fielded by both sides of the conflict likely left these outdated tanks largely ineffective against anything other than lighter targets. Still, as we can see from more recent conflicts, even outdated platforms can be useful as self-propelled guns to bring heavy firepower where it's needed quickly. Several of these survive today within collections in Israel following their capture. As some of you may have noticed, this is actually a remake of one of the very first episodes in this series I posted. Expect to see a few more revisits like this over the rest of the year as I bring some of those early videos up to my current standards and with more information on the topics. Regardless of that though, what do you think of the attempts to create a T-34-100? Was it a missed opportunity that should have been built earlier, or do vehicles like the T-100 prove that the platform was heavily outdated after World War II? Let me know in the comments. While you're down there, don't forget to try out War Robots Frontiers for free using my link to get that special starter bonus just for being a viewer of my channel. Huge thanks to them for sponsoring this video. Thanks as well to my ConelyFans who generously support this channel with their memberships, and to all of you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to check out the Tank Archives YouTube channel or more episodes in the Cursed by Design series on this channel. Thanks to him for helping out on this video, as well as thanks to Israeli Tank Nerd for his help. I'll leave links to both of them below. That's all I have for you today though, so I hope to see you back here again in the near future.